Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome into my latest edition of my top starts and sits for the fantasy football season as we enter week 3, the back half of the first quarter of the NFL season. I'll be giving you guys, as always, my top 2 starts and sits for quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and the tight end position. But as always, I start with the most important position in football, and that is quarterback. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into my top start of the week, which is going to be Kirk Cousins versus that Chargers defense. The Chargers have given up 660 passing yards in the first 2 weeks. A lot of that did come from Tua Tagovailoa in that first game where he had 400 something passing yards. But Ryan Tannehill and that Titans passing attack found some success against them this past Sunday. Tannehill threw for 246 passing yards. He had 2 total touchdowns. Now, one of those touchdowns was like a 12-yard rushing touchdown. But still, Tannehill ended up having one of his better games that you're going to see out of him from a fantasy quarterback this season. And I could just see Kirk Cousins, who has performed, who is coming off a strong game against that Eagles defense last week. I could see him continuing that success and having a great game where he's going to reach his ceiling in fantasy and give you the most points that you're probably going to get out of him out of most matchups throughout the year. And I can also just mainly see this being a barn burner game. The Vikings defense is not that great, so I can see this Chargers offense and this Vikings offense trading touchdowns, and this getting into both teams scoring 30 points, and then whoever wins this game is going to win the game like a 35-31 game. So yeah, I want all the points I can get out of this matchup. So if I have a Vikings player, I'm definitely going to line up at least a Vikings player in this passing attack. I'm definitely going to have him in my lineup this week. My other start, which is can be a questionable one because he did look a little rough, right, against that Steelers defense. But I think I'd give it a shot to Deshaun Watson this week against the Titans. The Titans have given up 2 straight 300-plus yard games to start the year. That was against Derek Carr in week 1 and then Justin Herbert this past week. And then the reason why I think Deshaun Watson can have a closer to his ceiling performance is not only there has been proven success passing the ball against the Titans defense, is now that without Nick Chubb and then how good that defensive front is for Tennessee, I could see them bottling up the rushing attack, and they're going to put like the Browns in a lot of like 3rd and 7s, 3rd and 10 situations. So they're going to have to put the ball in the air. And then if Deshaun can at least repeat the success that Derek Carr and Justin Herbert had, you're going to see him get closer to that 300 passing yards. I could see him having like I won't say 300. I can see him being more like that 250 range. And if he can get you 2 or 3 touchdowns, you get that great performance that you would want out of your quarterback for this week. Moving into my top sits, I am going to go with Ryan Tannehill against the Browns in that same game. The Browns defense has been pretty good to start the first 2 weeks. They've only given up 267 passing yards. And as far as the Titans offensive line, that is like my biggest worry is I think this Browns defensive front, which is really good with Myles Garrett and Zadarius Smith on the edge. I think they're going to give Ryan Tannehill problems throughout the game. I think they're going to be able to disrupt his timing with his wide receivers. So I know I just talked about how Tannehill had a good game against the Chargers. I want to be looking back at last week's outcomes and be like, oh man, Ryan Tannehill has some success. I saw Kenny Pickett make that one throw that broke for a long touchdown. Maybe I could see Tannehill doing that. For me, I would avoid Tannehill this week. My other sit, I'm going to go with Sam Howell against the Bills. Sam Howell has looked outstanding in the first 2 weeks, especially some of those throws that he was making against that Broncos defense this past week. But he's going to be going against a lot better defense in the Buffalo Bills. The Buffalo Bills have only given up 302 passing yards in the first 2 weeks. Now, I want to make sure that it is notable, though, that was against Zach Wilson and Jimmy G, so it wasn't like they were facing the best quarterbacks in the league. But another thing I'm kind of factoring in with this as well is I can see this Washington passing attack coming back down to earth. You got to keep in mind in the first 2 weeks, the Commanders faced the Arizona Cardinals and the Denver Broncos. The Broncos, they do have some respect as a defense, but they haven't been that great as far as the first 2 weeks in the season. And then we already know that you can move the ball pretty easily against that Cardinals defense. So I want to kind of see more out of Sam Howell before I can trust playing him against a good defense like the Bills. So if you have a better option, I would definitely play somebody else. And Howell and Tannehill, those are guys I'm not trying to have in my daily fantasy lineups as well. Moving into my top starts. Now, usually I do try to stay away from names that are like, yeah, obviously I'm going to start this guy, right? But now we're kind of getting into the point of the year where if guys aren't really producing for you, you gotta kind of disregard the draft capital where you got them and maybe consider putting them on the bench for a guy that is putting up some points. So that guy is, for me though, the top start. I know some people might be thinking elsewise, is going to be Josh Jacobs against the Steelers. He definitely has disappointed in the first 2 weeks of the season, but you also got to keep in mind he held out for basically all of training camp and the preseason. He's about I think he's just now over a month back into practicing and playing after that holdout, and then he's got a really good matchup going on right now against that Steelers defense, because this isn't the Steelers defense of the old. They have allowed 386 rushing yards. That is the most in the NFL. And then another factor is too, they don't have Cam Hayward. Cam Hayward just takes up so much space and is such a dominant player within the trenches. He can really affect a team's rushing attack. And then I know he plays as a safety, but not having Minkah Fitzpatrick back there in the secondary is a big. I mean, we'll have to see if he can play or not. But that did sound like it was a pretty serious. He had to go to the hospital, so I do wonder if he's gonna be out. And if he's out, there could be some miscommunication in the back end of that defense, or you just don't have Minkah making those special plays where he can come up and make the tackles. And I can see that leading to Jacobs having those explosive 20-plus runs throughout this game. So I totally can see Josh Jacobs having a normal fantasy game, something that we haven't seen from him so far this season. My next start at the running back position, I am going to go with Joshua Kelly against the Vikings. It came out like yesterday that Austin Eckler, he has no timetable on when he's going to return. He did not practice, so to me that tells me Austin Eckler is not going to be playing this week, and he's going against a Vikings defense that we saw DeAndre Swift and that Eagles rushing attack just attack him and go downhill, and they just handed the ball because the Vikings couldn't stop him. So that's a defense that you can take advantage right now to start the year. The Vikings defense has given up 332 rushing yards in 2 weeks. So I think I can see the Chargers offense wanting to take advantage of that. Maybe try to help out their defense is to kind of get the running game going and keeping their defense on the sidelines to stay fresh against that Vikings offense. So I think Joshua Kelly's going to see a lot of touches, and if he can take advantage of the matchup, you're going to see you're going to get the best performance out of him until probably Kelly, because his value will drop off obviously once Eckler's in the lineup. Moving into my top sit of the week, I am going to go with Rachaad White against the Eagles. Obviously, Rachaad had a better game in week 2 than what he did in week 1. But this week, you don't want to play him, especially in those daily lineups. He's going against the Eagles defense that have only given up 102 rushing yards in 2 weeks. That's the best in the NFL. And then I can just see the Eagles offense having some success against the Bucks. And then if they can go up, 2 touchdowns, that's going to change the game script for the Bucks offense, where they're going to have to lean into Baker Mayfield and that passing attack. And that's just going to take away the value from Rachaad White. If you're going to play White this week, just understand it's a strictly volume play, because he should still get the same amount of touches. I just don't see him having success with those touches on Monday night. My next sit, I'm gonna go with Gus Edwards and Justice Hill against the Colts. Now, I saw this right before I hit record on this video. Justice Hill did not practice today. It sounds like he might not be able to play. So if you do play Gus Edwards, just like I talked about Rachaad White, you're kind of going for the volume play out of him. But I don't see him really having much success against this Colts defense. They have a very stout front seven. There's a stat I saw for the Colts where it's just for them as a franchise. They have the most tackles for a loss since in the first 2 weeks of a season since their 2001 team. And then you look at the Ravens offensive line, Ronnie Stanley, their tackle, and Tyler Linderbaum, their center. They were labeled last week as week to week. They did not practice today. So if those two guys are out of the lineup, then you got the Colts defense that has DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart in the middle of the defense. And Kwity Paye is a very good very good against the run. So I get to see them bottling up this rushing attack. And based on, I'm going to talk about it here in the next section, but yeah, teams are having more success in the air against the Colts than the ground. So I don't think Edwards, or even if Hill does play, are going to give you much this week. Moving into my top starts and sits for the wide receivers position. A little spoiler I just talked about. I would definitely start Zay Flowers this week. We'll have to see about OBJ. Yeah, Odell Beckham Jr. He did hurt his ankle. I did see that he did not practice today. But if he ends up not being able to go, that even increases the value of a Rashad Bateman as a sleeper play, especially as a cheap option in those daily fantasy lineups, because he is going against the Colts defense. They are going against the Colts defense, and that's just because everything I just talked about. The Colts are very good up front, but the thing is, they have a very weak cornerback group right now, and teams are finding a lot of success attacking the boundary of this defense, and I could see that happening for Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson has looked good with this passing attack in the first 2 weeks, and he's probably going to more likely be able to continue that momentum. And the Colts have given up 574 passing yards this season, and they did give up 384 yards to CJ Stroud this past week. Now, you got to factor in, the Colts were up 2 scores, so the Texans obviously had to throw the ball more, but as long as the Colts can stay within this game, I expect the Ravens to lean more into the passing attack over their rushing attack on Sunday. Moving into my other start. Now, obviously, Justin Jefferson, I don't have to tell you guys to start him. That's why you don't see his name up there. But his counterpart, the first-round rookie for Minnesota, Jordan Addison against the Chargers. We got to see, what Jordan Addison could do in the first 2 weeks. He had a touchdown in each game, and I think he's going to continue to see his role increase. Everything I talked about with Kirk Cousins, as far as like why I would play Kirk Cousins, same thing goes for Jordan Addison. And you have Justin Jefferson out there, he's going to command all the attention, so you're going to get a lot of one-on-one opportunities for Addison. And remember, Justin Jefferson's rookie year, like the first game he really didn't do much, and then the second game he kind of had if I remember right, he kind of had a really good game, and then his role increased, like I want to say week 3 or week 4, he kind of just blew up for the rest of the season. I think that's what's going to happen for Addison. I think he's going to take more snaps away from KJ Osborne, so that's going to give him more opportunities to have more targets funneled his way. And I think they need to get him more involved in that offense to keep the chains moving in Minnesota. So I would definitely have Addison in my lineup this week. My top sits. Now, a couple of these names, they're temper your expectation plays. I totally understand why you would play some of them. But starting with my top sit group, DeAndre Hopkins and Treylon Burks against the Browns. Again, if you guys got to play them because of where you drafted them, or maybe you don't have a great wide receiver depth where you have a better option, I understand why you would play them. I would temper my expectations playing both of those guys this week. And obviously I would avoid them in any daily lineups. But it's just everything I talked about with Ryan Tannehill. That Browns defense have only given up 267 passing yards. They've been very good against teams' passing attacks so far this year, and I just see Hopkins and Treylon Burks finishing closer to their floor than to their ceilings in this game, and kind of carrying that over to my next sits. Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson against the Bills. Now you're going to play Terry McLaurin. I understand it, but when he's in your lineup, just temper your expectations. If he doesn't get you a great game, it's just because the matchup wasn't there for him. And then Jahan Dotson, as much as I like him, I got a good amount of shares on him. He's a guy I would definitely look to leave on my bench this week, and definitely not play either of these guys in my DFS lineups. And it's just kind of like what I said about Tannehill. Sam Howell, everything I said about Sam Howell goes for these guys. They're going against a Bills defense that's really good. And I can just see that that passing attack, like I mentioned earlier, coming back down to earth. And just like I said about Hopkins and Burks, I see both these guys finishing closer to their floor than I see them finishing closer to their ceilings. Again, I like to always hammer home about this, guys. Some of these names I talk about sitting, you probably have to play. Just temper your expectations on their outcomes, and if they exceed expectations, then that's just more of a benefit for you. But if you can, I'll look to avoid those guys this week. Moving into my final section, the lovely tight end position. And I'm doing my best to find these streaming tight ends for you guys throughout the year. I think I got a couple good options, especially in these daily lineups, because I definitely have a feeling both of my top two starts are some cheap options for you. My number one option, I'm going to go with Cade Otton, the Buccaneers tight end, against the Eagles. The Eagles have given up a lot of catches and yardage and touchdowns to the tight end position so far this season. Against Hunter Henry in week 1, they gave up 5 receptions for 56 yards and a touchdown. And then last week, TJ Hawkinson had 7 receptions for 66 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Eagles linebacker group is not that great. The secondary is a little banged up. So I think that's why we're seeing tight ends have success against the Philadelphia Eagles so far this season. And I could definitely see an... Sorry about that. That's my dog Titan. If you guys ever hear background noise, sometimes he doesn't know how to chill out when I make my videos. But with that being said, though, I think Cade Otton's a sneaky play for you in that Monday night matchup against the Eagles. My next top start of the week, I am going to go with Jake Ferguson against the Cardinals. That is the Cowboys tight end. A couple things, the Cardinals traditionally have given up a lot of points to tight ends over the recent seasons in fantasy football. In the first week, Logan Thomas had 4 catches for 43 yards, so not a lot, but if you play in PPR, that's 8.3 points for you, which is, I'll take that every week if I can, from tight ends in fantasy football. And then Darren Waller had 6 catches for 76 yards, so I think it's a good matchup for him, and I can see, CeeDee Lamb, and we'll see if Brandon Cooks is back, demanding that attention from the secondary, and that should open up the middle of the defense for Jake Ferguson and Dak Prescott to connect often throughout the game. Moving into my top sits, you guys, you're probably going to hear me say this every week. Just sit a tight end against the Saints. So that would be the rookie tight end for the Green Bay Packers, Luke Musgrave, against the Saints. The Saints are traditionally stout against the tight end position in fantasy football. In the first 2 weeks, Chigo Okonkwo and Hayden Hurst combined for 3 receptions for 20 yards on 5 targets. I don't know what their secret to success against tight ends is there in New Orleans, because this has been year in and year out where you don't want to play tight ends against the Saints. So if you're maybe thinking about that Luke Musgrave kid who has kind of looked good in the first 2 weeks, I would avoid him this week and maybe look at him going forward for the rest of the season. Another streaming tight end I would look to avoid this week, I would go with Gerald Everett against the Vikings. Like I talked about with Joshua Kelly, I could see the Chargers leaning into that rushing attack after the success that Philadelphia had against the Minnesota. And then you look at what they did last week against Dallas Goedert. He caught the ball 6 times, which is great for PPR leagues, but on those 6 receptions, he only had 22 yards. And it's not like Gerald Everett's going to see the amount of targets and receptions that Goddard had this past week. And then if you look at week 1, Cade Otton against the Vikings, he only had 2 receptions for 19 yards. So there hasn't been much production out of the tight end position against the Vikings defense. So I know Gerald can be a nice streaming option if you want to roll the dice on him, but this is a week I would look to avoid him. But yeah, that is my top starts and sits for week 3. As always, guys, if there's any players I did not talk about, feel free to get in my comment sections or my DMs, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible on any players that you have some concerns or questions about. As always, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, follow me on all my social media platforms. Next time you guys will see me, as always, it will be Tuesday night when I do my top waiver wires and streamable defenses. I hope you guys kick butt this week. Talk to you then.